Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Nite Namani.
When I first started joining, I just turned 16 and was still going to high school. I became interested right away, and so, wanting to know more and more about Srila Prabhupada. And in those times, we called Srila Prabhupada Swamiji. And in those times, I was wanting to tell Srila Prabhupada everything I did. I just got initiated in December, and I was telling Srila Prabhupada I was living at home. My mother wouldn't let me go to the temple, and I lived far away, but I had an altar. And in those times, Lord Jagannath at the temple, he was actually not in the temple, but you went through the courtyard and upstairs to his apartment on 2nd Avenue, and everyone would actually work in front of Lord Jagannath. He didn't have clothes on, and everyone ate, slept, ate, offered. And so it was very, basics. And anyway, at home, I had an altar, and I was offering everything I thought that was really nice for Krishna. I mean, I offered, foodstuffs. I made nice food, and it was prasadam, but things that I thought were beautiful, I wanted to put on the altar, like cattails in those days, and moss and bark. I was really into natural, real earthy things. And I wrote all this to Srila Prabhupada. I wrote him a 6-page letter. I wanted to tell him everything I was doing. I wanted to be totally honest and just lay it all out to him exactly. I went to school, did my homework, chanted on the subway. Anyway, he wrote me back a letter saying, "My sincere blessings are for you for your nice prosecution of Krishna consciousness. Whatever you are doing at the present moment is approved by me, and I think on account of your becoming a sincere soul, Krishna is dictating from within, and you are doing things so nicely." And it was just so encouraging because, as years went on, just seeing the standards, in devotional service, our deity worship and everything, he was just accepting, whatever I was doing. And even back then, I remember succinctly hearing Srila Prabhupada say, one devotee asked him, what are all the rules? Have you told us all the rules and regulations? And he said, if I told you everything, you'd faint. So it was like really clear, he was giving so much room for us to kind of toddle along.
One of the first pastimes was that my wife and I had hitchhiked across the country from the East Coast because the devotees in Philadelphia were telling us about this great Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco, and that if we went, we could meet His Divine Grace. So we went to Berkeley, and at the time I was like a folk musician, wearing a fringed leather jacket and carrying a guitar, and I would write to Prabhupada regularly and send him letters about who I was. I even sent him letters with like the lyrics to the songs I was writing and everything. And occasionally in Berkeley, like once every few months, a letter would come with the letterhead, His Divine Grace, Sri Dandi Goswami, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And so I remember one day Jayananda was temple president at the time, where a letter from Prabhupada came, and there was news that a letter from Prabhupada came. And so all the devotees gathered around, and Jayananda opened it up, and they were all saying, "Who's it for? Who's it for?" And Jayananda read it and said, "Oh no, it's for that guy Tom that lives up the block." So I learned from those experiences that His Divine Grace really did not discriminate. Whoever came to Him, He reciprocated with.
Detroit, 1971, I was initiated. We drove up from New Vrindavan. And being initiated by Srila Prabhupada is such an awesome experience that I was completely stunned at the initiation. The system was, you've probably seen the pictures where you see strands of beads on microphones draped. So Prabhupada would chant on these beads. He'd chant one round on the beads, and then you'd be called up for the initiation. So we were in Detroit, and Prabhupada was chanting on the beads that were to become my initiation beads. And my name is called Richard Hall, and I staggered up, knelt in front of Prabhupada. Now, when you looked at Srila Prabhupada, you were looking at a person who was unfathomable. It's like looking at the ocean of truth. And at the same time, he's looking right through you. So it's an incredible experience. So he asked me the 4 rules. I answered, and he said, your name is Suresvara. It is a name for Lord Brahma. It means controller of the demigods. You are servant of the controller. So as he was saying this, I was like just getting more and more stupefied. I was kneeling in front of him like this. And I was, So he saw that I was stunned. So he had the beads. As he was speaking, he had the beads in his hands. He just finished chanting. And he saw that I was stunned, so he just held out the beads. And he said, come on, take your beads. He started rattling them in front of my nose just to...
My wife and myself used to love cooking in the kitchen in Manhattan Temple all the time. And one day, Prabhupada was arriving next day, and we were told to make a tulsi skirt. And my wife didn't know at those days how to sew. And we got an assignment we couldn't do. So regardless, we took that assignment, my wife especially, stayed whole night making that tulsi skirt for Prabhupada's tulsi. We come in the morning with the tulsi skirt, the devotee looks at it, says, oh, this is a terrible job. How could you do like this? Don't you have any sense? And my wife started crying, and I was hurt, didn't know what to do. But we put the tulsi skirt anyway. And we are all sitting really broken-hearted what offense we did. And time goes by, we are all waiting for Prabhupada to come. And Prabhupada walks into the room. The very first statement he makes, what a beautiful tulsi skirt. And we were crying first time out of broken heart, and we both started crying again. And we never derived such a great pleasure from second crying. And this made us realize that it seems we just met Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thank you very much.
My parents met him because I was involved taking drugs previously, and they thought this was another outlet for drug taking. So they came and met Prabhupada, and he convinced them that that wasn't the case. And after that, when a lot of times Prabhupada saw me, he would ask me how my parents were. And he said, one time I was in his room the same way, he called me in, and he asked me how my parents were. He said, actually, you are the father of your parents. Or he said, you are the father of your father. And I said, this was new concept at that time. And he said, well, the father means one who gives birth into life. He said, so you're giving them birth into spiritual life, so actually you're the father. You're the real father.
Srila Prabhupada was on the morning walk with so many different types of people. Swarup Damodar Prabhu was there, and Srila Prabhupada would discuss scientific matters with him, and so many devotees were there. And by chance, my mother and father had come to visit, so they were also there. So, Srila Prabhupada said to my mother that, and she was approaching 60 at the time, And Srila Prabhupada said to her, "Oh, Mrs. Titan, you look so young." And she was really pleased. She was really pleased. So at the end of the walk, we came to where the cars were parked. And at the time, Srila Prabhupada was riding in a Rolls Royce. And when we got there, Srila Prabhupada may have noticed that my father was looking at his car. And, you know, very shyly and humbly, Srila Prabhupada looked down and he said to my father, "My disciples have gotten this for me." And my father immediately said, "Oh, no, no, you deserve it, you deserve it." Then, again, dealing very expertly, Srila Prabhupada said to my father, "So you can come with me, we can ride back together in the car." And my father said, "No, you can go with the other disciples." So after everything was finished, Hari Sori, who was Srila Prabhupada's servant at the time, said to Srila Prabhupada that, "Srila Prabhupada, everyone loves you so much." And Srila Prabhupada said, "Yes, because I love everyone."
And like so many of the other Prabhus were sharing, I really was hankering after the personal association of Srila Prabhupada. I mean, I was desperate. Everybody, it seemed like so many devotees were getting personal association, and I was like a nobody. I was a new devotee, and I just was desperate. So I somehow conned my way through Jayatirtha into a morning walk. And we went down to Venice Beach with Srila Prabhupada, and I was so nervous, I was so scared. And I remember walking on the right of Srila Prabhupada, and he was talking about the wave and the ocean. And I remember one wave came up really high and was almost touching Srila Prabhupada's feet, and I jumped up on the embankment, and Prabhupada saw that the wave was going to wet his feet, and he put his hand out for me, and I helped Prabhupada up the embankment. And that was it for me. You know, a new devotee. I had actually touched Prabhupada and helped him up the embankment. See, but now I started to feel my oats. Okay, now I'd already helped Prabhupada. I started like getting puffed up behind that, and I thought, I'm going to ask him a question. I'm actually going to come right out and ask him a question. My real heart's desire, of course, is to get the personal recognition of Srila Prabhupada, not that I was really interested in the question. I asked Srila Prabhupada about Tulsi Devi. I can't even remember the exact question, something about another form, whether Tulsi does ever take another form or not. I forget exactly what. But Srila Prabhupada turned to me and he said, "Why are you asking me this question?" And I went, how about, you know. And all the sannyasis go like this, you know. And I said, well, I'm worshiping Srila Prabhupada, I'm worshiping Tulsi Devi, Srila Prabhupada, and I start like trying to come up with an excuse, and I'm trying to talk fast, and he said, "Why are you asking me this question?" I just lost it at that time, and I just shut up and turned every color of the rainbow. And he answered my question. In all his mercy, Prabhupada answered my question.
So finally, in 1975, I got a chance to go on a morning walk with Prabhupada in Miami Beach. It was about a dozen of us, so it wasn't like 300 people in a temple room, it was just a few of us on the beach. So Prabhupada was walking on the shore, and his cane would put holes in the sand right as the ocean would come up. And then when someone would ask a question, he would stop. He was leading the pack, and he'd turn to answer us, like this. So somehow, at one point in the walk, I stopped short, right in back of Prabhupada's head. His head was about this far from me. And somebody asked a question, I don't know what the question was, and then Prabhupada started speaking. I didn't know what he was saying, because all I could think was, wow, I'm right in back of Prabhupada's head. And I was studying his head, and it was golden head, and it had silver hairs, and different furrows in the back of his neck. And then Krishna gave me a wonderful idea, realization, that I was this far from Prabhupada physically, but actually, spiritually, I was like millions of miles away. So it was too bad that was true, but it was also enlivening because all of a sudden I realized that what the devotees had told me all these years was true, that actually real association is not physical. It's vibration, vani. And I became very happy that I also had the opportunity to become very close and intimate with Prabhupada through vibration, vani.
So during the festival, the temple president, who I think still is, Rabindranath Prabhu, had invited one Indian professor to come and speak with Prabhupada. So only a few devotees knew about it, and this was going on in Prabhupada's quarters, which were just across the street from the temple at that time. And one of the devotees that knew told me about it. Hey, come on up, you know. So I said, okay, great. So I went upstairs and sat down in front of Prabhupada's desk, maybe 6 or 7 feet away from Prabhupada. And let's see, Rabindranath Swarup was there, Rupanuga, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Goswami, several other devotees. Anyway, so I think it was either Rupanuga or Rabindra, I can't remember, introduced the professor. This is Professor so-and-so. I think his name has changed in the Lamrita so he doesn't sue us for slander. And and he's a professor of Hinduism and philosophy. So Prabhupada looks at the man straight on, he says, so, what is this Hinduism? And the first thing comes out of the guy's mouth is, I don't know, you tell me, you know? Thinking that somehow he would be at an advantage if Prabhupada, you know, spoke first, you know. And he brought several students with him. It was obvious the whole idea is he was going to, try to defeat Prabhupada and impress his students. So Prabhupada looks at Bhakti Swarup Damodar Goswami and he says, he points to the professor, he says, so, he has called you a cheater. No, excuse me, no. He said, so he is teaching, but he does not know. What is that called? So Bhakti Swarup Damodar Goswami says, he's a cheater, Prabhupada. Right? So then Prabhupada points to Bhakti Swarup Damodar Goswami looking at the professor and says, so he has called you a cheater. What have you got to say for yourself? And the man kept trying to wiggle around and go around to the side and talk about something else, but Prabhupada wouldn't let him go. Prabhupada would always do that. He wouldn't let him go. He'd stay on one point. And somehow or another it went back and forth, and he had the man actually admit that he was a cheater. But the man was so crazy, he said, but I am an honest cheater. And let's see, trying to remember the details. So Prabhupada was talking about surrender at one point in the conversation. So the man, so he says, so you understand? No, I don't want this meaning. Prabhupada was talking to Abhidi Prabhupada, surrender to a spiritual master. And he's talking about surrender. And so the man says, no, I don't want this meaning. I want the, so you don't know what the word surrender means? He points to one devotee. He says, look in the dictionary for Mr. Professor. He doesn't know what surrender means. He's a professor. He says, no, I want the Sanskrit etymological meaning. And then Prabhupada points to the door and says, get out. You don't want a spiritual master, you want a Sanskrit teacher. Get out. Somehow or another, I don't know how, the conversation went back and forth a little bit more. And then finally, a big smile comes over Prabhupada's face, and he puts his head on his elbow like this, and he turns sideways and looks at all the devotees and smiles. And he points to the professor and he says, he's a madman. And everybody in the room cracked up. Even the students that came with the professor cracked up in laughter. I'm forgetting all the details in order. Anyway, at one point in the conversation, the man was getting a little bit offensive, kind of like snaky-like. So Brahmananda, who was the Swami at the time, was like in another room, like 10 feet down the hall, and he could hear everything that was going on. So all of a sudden you hear, boom, 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 boom. The door flies open, and there's huge 300 and some pound, I don't know how, Brahmananda with just a lungi on, no shirt, just a lungi. And, excuse me, sir, you'll have to come along with me, sir, now. And the guy started shaking and shivering, literally, trembling. I have said something offensively? Before you do, sir, come along. Anyway, Rabbeinu Svarupa afterwards was apologizing to Prabhupada. I had no idea he would act in such a horrible way. Please forgive me, Prabhupada. Prabhupada just laughed and said, that's okay, at least he was chastised.
My wife and I used to run a little store across the street called the Surabi store. And I did get to do a little bit for Srila Prabhupada by making him dabs for his afternoon refreshment when he woke up. So the last year that Srila Prabhupada was here with us in Los Angeles, GBC came to another devotee and I named Bhaskara and asked us if we would like the devotional service of being Srila Prabhupada's bodyguard. They had used us a lot in the past for taking sums of money to the bank like that. And for 4 or 5 years I had carried a weapon all the time because of the rascals and things that had gone on in New Vrindavan like that. So they knew I was experienced with this, and one boy had done it the year before, tried to do it 24 hours a day. They didn't think that was appropriate. So they asked us if 3 of us would split the 24 hours up. So about the middle of the second week of doing this devotee Bhaskara, he and I we were hippies together, we had joined the movement together. All of our service seemed to coincide together. We were sitting having lunch, and he was saying, did you notice Srila Prabhupada, he does the same thing at the same time every day? And I goes, yeah, it's amazing. You can almost set your watch. He goes, well, do you know, someone gave him a brand new pair of slippers the other day. And all he wears them is from his room to the curtain at the temple room, and he takes them off. After class, he puts them on and wears them up and takes them off at his door every day. And I goes, yeah. He goes, well, he says, they're brand new, and I kind of looked at them last night, and I got the model number and the manufacturer's name, and I bought another pair just exactly like them. Well, what are you going to do with them? His feet are not the same size as your feet. And he goes, well, tomorrow morning, he had the morning, I had the evening. He said, tomorrow morning when he goes down for class, he's going to wear his slippers down. I'm going to exchange them for my slippers. And then he'll wear my slippers back upstairs, and I will exchange them again. And I'll have a pair of slippers that Srila Prabhupada wore. Maybe just one time, but Srila Prabhupada will have worn my slippers. So I'm thinking, wow, that's a good idea. I said, so tomorrow I'm going to go out and buy a pair of slippers, and we'll do the same thing the next day. So the next day we do our service, we get together at lunch, and I says, well, did you get your slippers? He goes, yeah. I says, well, I says, where do I go buy mine? He says, you shouldn't do it. And I'm thinking, yeah, you got your slippers. So he says, no, he says, let me tell you what happened. He says, Srila Prabhupada put his slippers on in the morning, and he came downstairs, he took them off at the door at the temple room. I exchanged them. After class, Srila Prabhupada came back out and put his slippers on, my slippers. He wore them upstairs, and he wore them right into his room. He never took them off at the door. I'm going, really? What did you do? And he says, well, I stood there chanting japa thinking, what am I going to do now? He says, I was there, he says, about 5 minutes, and he says, this sannyasi came down, and he says, is your name Bhaskara? And he goes, yes. And he says, Srila Prabhupada has a message for you. He says, he wishes to thank you very much for the new slippers. And you may keep the old slippers. But most importantly, he said it is not nice to play tricks on the spiritual master.
In India, there was, of course, the Hare Krishna land affair, purchasing of Hare Krishna land, which we now have our big Radharasa Bihari temple on. Prabhupada was advised about this land by one devotee, Tusta Krishna. Prabhupada was in New Delhi at the time. He came down Sister Krishna had made friends with one Mr. Nair, who was the, I think, owner, huh? He was the owner of Free Press Journal. Free Press Journal, yeah. Anyway, it's a very long story, which His Holiness Giriraj Maharaj will be writing in detail about. He's writing a book now about this. But it took, Prabhupada got into a negotiation with him. And after a long time, we signed a sales agreement. And this sale agreement, Mr. Nair had really no plan to fulfill the agreement. And after a certain amount of time, it ran out of time. The sale agreement ran out of time. And we could not sign the conveyance, which is the final document of change of title. So a long period ensued in between, in which Mr. Nair tried to remove the devotees from the land. It was a very, it's big history part of the history of ISKCON. And there are many heroic battles that were fought. Prabhupada said it was like Kurukshetra. Even to the point of the temple, the temporary temple was demolished. Prabhupada had installed Radharas Bihari at the Bombay Pandal, and then he put the deity there and he prayed to the deity, "My dear Lord, now I'm requesting you to sit down here and I will arrange everything for you, but don't leave." And Prabhupada made this promise to the deity. And, so many things happened trying to get the deity and the devotees off the land. And wherever Prabhupada was all over the world, this was just constantly in his mind. Hare Krishna land, Hare Krishna land, Hare Krishna land. So finally, Prabhupada came back, and after a long tussle, again we were in Hyderabad. And Prabhupada arranged for Mr. Nair to come to meet him. We were staying at the house of one Mr. Panalal Pitti, a very wealthy man, the wealthiest man in Hyderabad city. And Mr. Nair came with his guru, who was some type of a pseudo-guru. And the purpose of bringing his guru was that Mr. Nair felt that Prabhupada had some type of mystic power, and he would put some spell on him and, take the land. So after a big dinner, Prabhupada was yawning, and Mr. Nair and his guru immediately said, "Swamiji, I think that you must be getting tired. We should let you rest." And Prabhupada said, "I'm very tired." So he retired, and immediately Mr. Nair and his guru went to sleep in the next room. So after about 5 minutes, Prabhupada's secretary called me into the room. Prabhupada wasn't sleeping at all, although Prabhupada always slept after eating. Everybody knows this, but he wasn't sleeping. So Prabhupada said, "What are they doing?" So I said, "They're sleeping." He said, "Go in there and wake up Mr. Nair, but don't wake up the guru." So I went there, to the side of the bed, and I shook Mr. Nair's arm. Mr. Nair, I said, "Prabhupada wants to see you." Shh. And I pointed out, "Your guru's sleeping, don't wake up your guru." So I took Mr. Nair in the room, and Prabhupada just started to preach to him. And, Mr. Nair was just sitting there, and he's listening and listening, and gradually Prabhupada got him to agree to sign the agreement all over again. And he told Shamsud and me, "Immediately go in and type the whole agreement out." So we went in and we started typing on the mechanical, typewriter, old typewriter Prabhupada had, typed it out. Prabhupada got it signed. And by the time he finished signing, the guru got up, and he came in, and Mr. Nair, had signed away the land again. So, Mr. Nair just kept hitting his head. He said, "What have I done? What have I done?" Prabhupada said, "It's okay." Jai. Shri Gaurnitai ki. Shri Rukmini Dwarkadish ki. Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Devi ki. What do we do? Is there an arti now, or organizers?
Yes, you can go until 4:45 tomorrow.
All right. So, but it was done. There was nothing that could be done. So at that point, Prabhupada sent us back. We had to accompany Mr. Nair back to Bombay. And we took this old flight, hopping flight, was bouncing like anything, propeller plane. Myself, Shem Sundar, and Mr. Nair. Anyway, as it turned out, the lawyers, our own lawyers, were actually working in cahoots with Mr. Nair and Mr. Nair's lawyers. And so, within a period of 10 days, they convinced Shem Sundar and I that it was the greatest blunder to go ahead with this contract. So, once again, you know, this is another fatal blunder. We canceled the contract. We let it run out without fulfilling it. So Prabhupada, I think, was in Pune, and I called him up to tell him the good news. So I said, Srila Prabhupada, you know, I wanted to call you to tell you. And he said, what has happened? Did everything go through? And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. We canceled the contract. And all I heard was click. Prabhupada just hung the phone up. Prabhupada came back, and then for about the next 2 months, Prabhupada would call in one member after the other, and he would sort of parade me in. And he'd say, this foolish boy, and he'd show him the contract, and he said he canceled the contract. He canceled the contract. Anyway, this was such a huge blunder. So, the thing I feel about these, and there were more such blunders that went on in time, but I think that the wonderful quality of Prabhupada through all of these is that he never gave up on a devotee or on a disciple. No matter how many mistakes a devotee might make, he wanted to see if a devotee would continue to want to serve Krishna and to serve him. In that instance, with the cancellation of the contract, Prabhupada did not reject me. He gave me the opportunity to go through, a hellish year and a half after that with Giriraj Maharaj, where we had to go, all the time into Bombay, sitting in the lawyers' chambers, and just trying to rectify the situation. So it's a symptom of Srila Prabhupada that he never gave up on a devotee. He said about Krishna that when you chant Hare Krishna even one time sincerely, that Krishna will never leave you alone. So I feel the same way, that Prabhupada never leaves you alone. Even you may make many mistakes in his service, still he does not reject you. But he accepts you just as a father would accept a child, a parent accepts a child. He expects that there may be mistakes. He will chastise you like anything, but he never gives you the sense that he doesn't love you. So despite all of the grand mistakes that were made, I never got the sense that Prabhupada loved me less because of them. And I always felt encouraged and never felt discouraged, even when these mistakes occurred.
So there at the Palais, the question and answer period came. Prabhupada said, any questions? And everybody, immediately all the hands shot up. So there was a lot of questions. So Prabhupada, first he asked one, all right, he pointed. So this man stood up, and he wanted to hear himself talk more than he wanted to ask Prabhupada a question. He said, first, Your Divine Grace, how are you enjoying your stay in Australia? Very, warm. How do you like Australia? And he said, Prabhupada said, I like it very much. And everybody clapped. Yay, clapped. And Prabhupada said, I like every place very much. They all kind of went, And he said, because everything belongs to Krishna. Therefore, I like every place. Because everything belongs to Krishna. So the next man shot his hand up and said, what do you think about Meher Baba? And Prabhupada said, who is he? So this is the way Prabhupada's technique was to diffuse a person like that. And then the third man was, there was a couple other questions, but then the third man, with another man, he put his hand up. It was a boy, a young, 22, 23-year-old boy. Very kind of puffed up. He stood up and he said, "Today I choose to be God. Today I choose to take the responsibility of the whole universe upon myself. Therefore, I am God." So you can see the Prabhupada, when he got mad, his lower lip would quiver a little bit. If anybody's been close enough to Prabhupada, when he actually gets angry, his lower lip begins to quiver. So his lip began to quiver, and Prabhupada took a deep breath, and he said, "Oh," he said, "my God is powerful." And the man said, "Well, I choose to be the all-powerful God." And Prabhupada said, "Well, I choose to kick on your face with shoes. Can you stop me?" And the man said, "Well, give me some time." And Prabhupada said, "My God is powerful all the time. Why should I accept you as God?" And then the whole auditorium burst into laughter. The man was mortified. He was feeling very bad and everything like that. And then, just like that, Prabhupada turned and he said, "Please, don't waste your time on this nonsense. Try to be godly. Don't try to be God." So he changed immediately from this lion, ferocious lion, to this soft, beautiful rose. And this was Srila Prabhupada's quality, that he would use very harsh language. He would deal very strongly when something was offensive to Krishna, but at the same time, he saw everyone as an opportunity for him to extend the loving, tender hand from Krishna and from his spiritual master. He saw everybody that he came into contact with as actually sent by his spiritual master for him to bring back to home, back to Godhead.
1972, September, Srila Prabhupada's flying into Dallas to install Sri Sri Radhakalachandji. He arrives in Love Field via American Airlines. We usher him into the VIP room at Love Field. And Prabhupada sits on this makeshift dais and immediately starts talking about the 3 ways to fly. He just sits on this seat and he says, "So, there are 3 ways to fly." So the reporters are all there and they're taking down this 3 ways to fly. I'm standing next to this woman reporter and I'm looking at her pad. 3 ways to fly. Yes, Prabhupada starts. Yes. Pigeon. He didn't say swan, he said pigeon. Pigeon, mantra, and machine. Yes, formerly, Prabhupada said, formerly people knew the art of training up pigeons, he said, and you just get on the pigeons and just fly. So the woman's writing pigeon. and then he says, and then mantra. Mantra, simply by vibrating mantra, the yogi knew how to ride on the sound. Like that. So mantra, all the reporters are writing this down. And then machine. And then so this lady shot up her hand. And she said, "So, Swami, if you know all these different ways to fly, then why did you choose to fly American Airlines today?" So Prabhupada said, "To be one with you." And the lady turned to me and she said, "I like that man."
Once Srila Prabhupada was talking about his relationship with Dr. Misra, who you know had the yoga camp in New York. And Srila Prabhupada was saying that how he was good friends with Dr. Misra. Although when Dr. Misra would speak Mayavad philosophy, Srila Prabhupada would protest very vehemently and argue. But on a personal level, they were friends. And when Dr. Misra became sick, Srila Prabhupada personally cooked for him and nursed him back to life. So from this I understood that there's a difference between philosophy and one's personal dealings. That on matters of philosophy, Srila Prabhupada argued with him very strongly. But personally, they were friends.
When Srila Prabhupada was and came to Sanskrit Rath Yatra, and there was devotees who had a infamous prasadam distribution program in Laguna Beach, and they made a lot of Lakshmi. So he came up to Srila Prabhupada and he gave Srila Prabhupada $30,000 cash. It was like in $500 bills or $100 bills, I don't remember. And so Srila Prabhupada real jokingly said, oh, he actually knew how the person got the money. He said, how did you get this money? He said, well, Srila Prabhupada, I sell drugs. And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, I used to sell drugs too. He said, what pharmacy do you work for?
Oh, one time he asked me, I was 18, so I was getting pimples, acne at the time. And he said, oh, what is that on your face? And I said, oh, they're pimples, Prabhupada. So he said, oh, you should put little tilak. So I would go and put tilak spots on my face. And then it was a little, you couldn't really walk around the streets like that. So next time he saw me, he said, oh, what? He asked me about my pimples again. He said, well, what about the tilak, or why I wasn't doing it? I said, I can't walk around like that. It's just too... He said, oh, you should take a little olive oil and boric acid, and you heat it in a spoon over the fire, and make a little ointment, and you put that on. And sure enough, that produced like a salve that looked just like any ointment, and it wasn't so... that showed his personal side.
And later on in the years, I had a wonderful experience of being alone with Srila Prabhupada when he was in Hawaii. I was on my way to Japan to try and distribute books there. Actually, it was just that the Japanese people were so pious, they were giving so much Lakshmi, so the devotees were going there to try and build Vrindavan. But Srila Prabhupada asked me to come up to his quarters, and he just wanted to talk about book distribution. And he was sitting on his chair there, and he was asking me all sorts of questions about, you know, how did people like the books? What kind of people were taking the books? What did you tell them? And it was such a wonderful experience to talk with Srila Prabhupada because it seemed like it was his favorite topic, and he was so joyful. So he would say, well, what kind of people are taking the books? And you know, I was straining my mind. I said, well, doctors and young people and diplomats. Prabhupada said, diplomats? What countries? And so then I had to go down a list of every country of anyone that had ever taken a book. And then I remember I said something like, well, someone took a book from Albania. And Prabhupada said, Albania, that's behind the Iron Curtain. He said, and I said, yes, Prabhupada, they take it in their suitcase, and because they have diplomatic immunity, no one can open the suitcase. And then he started to laugh, and he leaned back and he said, ah, we cannot go, but Lord Chaitanya can go.
Later on here in Los Angeles, when Srila Prabhupada was staying in his quarters, and at that time he was working very hard on his books, and every morning after Mangalarti, they would make announcements that, don't bother Srila Prabhupada, please. Everyone wants to talk to him, but he's very busy. Only GBCs and sannyasis should have darshan of Srila Prabhupada. So I didn't accept that philosophy. So I made an agreement with Rakshana Das, who was Prabhupada's personal bodyguard here. He used to stand at the bottom of the steps to let me upstairs one time. So one night at about 9:30, all of the big guns had come down the steps. They just had a big meeting with Prabhupada, and it was very late. And I was, very afraid, but I was a small temple president, and I had a $50 donation, big time, to go see Srila Prabhupada with. So Rakshana made sure that everybody was gone, and he talked to Shrudakirti, and Shrudakirti walked me upstairs, and we went in Prabhupada's room. And at the time, Prabhupada was standing looking out the window with his back to the door and chanting japa softly. So Shrudakirti said, oh, Prabhupada, your disciple from Phoenix, Arizona has come here to see you. And Srila Prabhupada turned around very slowly, and I was like shaking in my boots, because the atmosphere was like, why are you bothering, Prabhupada, and he's very busy, and you're a nobody in this society. And when Srila Prabhupada turned around very slowly, and I was shaking, but when he turned around and I could see him, he had a radiant smile on his face. And the emanation of love from his heart was such that he made me feel like I'm his long-lost son and I've come back to see him. And it was a very personal, loving exchange, and it had nothing to do with the atmosphere of fear or what have you done for me, or are you a big devotee or are you a small devotee. It was the spiritual master showing his loving feeling for his disciple, and I really, of course, I'll never forget that.
During the struggle to get Hare Krishna land, we did not have any proper accommodation for Srila Prabhupada in Juhu. So he used to stay at different places that we could arrange for him. So we had arranged for Srila Prabhupada to stay at the house of one of our good friends and life members, Mr. P.L. Sethi, who is building a house in the Juhu scheme. And before the house was completed, Mr. Sethi invited Srila Prabhupada to stay there. So Srila Prabhupada was in a room on the first floor upstairs, and he was talking with some respectable persons. And suddenly, one poor Indian laborer appeared at the doorway to the room. And he was, quite dark complexion, wearing some little cloth around his waist. And he walked right through all the respectable persons in the room up to Srila Prabhupada's table. And he put something on the table. It was a bundle of flowers. And then he put his head down in obeisances, stood up, and walked out of the room. And Srila Prabhupada was so moved by this offering that he couldn't think about anything else for many minutes. At first he was completely stunned. He was just completely silent. This simple laborer, how did he even know that Srila Prabhupada was in the house? How did he get the idea to collect some flowers from here and there? But somehow he got the idea, he walked right in, offered the flowers, paid obeisances, and walked out. And Srila Prabhupada remained silent for some moments. And then he said, just see how he has come with devotion. And he quoted the verse, Patram pushpam phalam tvayam yome bhakta prayachati. That anyone who offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a fruit, a flower, or some water, I will accept it. So Srila Prabhupada said he offered with devotion some flowers, and how much I have been affected. And then he said, just imagine the greatness of Krishna. I'm just an ordinary living entity. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But even Krishna, if he's offered just a leaf or a flower with love and devotion, he will accept it. So, how great is Krishna?
And also, he was giving me instructions about how to distribute books. First, he asked, what did we say? And so I kind of just explained, we asked the person, you look like a spiritual person. This is a book, from ancient India. It has so much knowledge. And then he pulled out the Srimad Bhagavatam and he read the verse that this Bhagavad Purana is as brilliant as the sun. And he read it very slowly and very carefully. And he said, if you just tell people this one verse, it is so wonderful. How could they resist? He said, so you don't need to say anything except the Srimad Bhagavatam will sell itself. And he also was talking to me about women. and how in this age it was actually a benefit to be a woman to be able to preach, because he was saying that in Kali Yuga, things are so degraded that people don't trust men. He says, nobody will allow a man to come up to them hardly, or they would never let a man knock on their door and open the door. Yeah. So then he said, but he told a story about when he was a young man, they were selling this hair oil, this Brahmi hair oil. And they would send these young women, respectable young women, door to door, and then everybody would open the door and buy Brahmi hair oil. And Prabhupada said, it was not even ever proven that this Brahmi hair oil had any medicinal properties. He said, but as women, this is Lord Chaitanya's plan, that, he is sending all these nice young women, and so you can help these poor conditioned souls go back to Godhead.
Later on, I was in Chicago Temple, and Srila Prabhupada came to visit. And he was at the airport. He was getting ready to leave. And it was just after that very famous controversial press conference about the 64-ounce brain and the 32-ounce brain. And we were distributing big books at the temple as Srila Prabhupada was leaving. And Prabhupada looked over and saw one of the Matajis distributing big books. And he smiled this huge grin and said to the devotee that was next to him, he says, my female devotees, my women disciples, they have 64-ounce brain.
I came with Brahmarupa, another devotee, and we were also, both of us were hankering after Prabhupada's association, like I said. And Prabhupada used to come out this door for his morning walks. And Brahmarupa had a really bright idea one time. He was going to go up and get a whole pail full of flower petals and shower Srila Prabhupada when he came out the door. But what happened is Brahmarupa got up there and he made a ball. He was so nervous, he was like this with the petals, like this. And when Srila Prabhupada came out, he went, and the ball of flower petals like hit Prabhupada on the head, right? And I just went, there goes Brahmarupa's spiritual life, that's it. But Prabhupada just went like this, and we went, Jai Srila Prabhupada, it was so wonderful. Thank you very much. Haribol.
And on March 2nd, 1972, when I was on my way to Africa, after Prabhupada had laid the cornerstone for Mayapur, I went into Srila Prabhupada's room and I said, Srila Prabhupada, I'm going to Africa now. I hope this gives me an opportunity to increase my service to you. And Srila Prabhupada went like this, and he said, service to Lord Chaitanya, service to Lord Chaitanya, service to Lord Chaitanya. And when I ended up there alone, other devotee had left. Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter to me saying that I'm very much pleased at the responsibility you've taken to spread Krishna consciousness in South Africa at such a young age. It made me feel connected to Prabhupada and the movement, even though I was 2 miles from any neighbors and 2,000 miles from any devotees. And when Prabhupada said, I am praying to you that you'll have the strength and enthusiasm to carry out this mission, somehow or other I had that, even though I was 19 years old and alone. I try to remember that today, that please Prabhupada, pray to Krishna and have the strength and enthusiasm to carry out whatever my mission is.
I was born and raised here in the Dwarka, and I remember during Guru Puja, my Mataji brought me up in front, and all I can remember is seeing this old wise man and the awe and reverence that everybody is treating him with. And I'm not quite scared and I'm not quite happy. And my Mataji, she has to push me. And I go up and I'm, can I have a cookie, And Srila Prabhupada, he just takes a cookie off the plate and he hands it down and he smiles. And all of a sudden I'm not frightened anymore. I'm all, this guy's okay, he's giving me a cookie. And that's what I remember. Thank you.
Prabhupada had a devotee there who was a Sikh by birth. He joined us, and Giriraj Swami and myself and this devotee, his name was Chaitya Guru at the time, Chaitya Guru. So he was driving us around, and we would be going, making members and collecting money to build a Vrindavan temple in Bombay. So after a while, this devotee somehow got it in his mind that he should go off on his own and leave and make his own way spiritually in life. And he took up living on Juhu Beach with one bogi yogi, with the intention of learning the art of passing a coin from one ear out the other ear. So before he had done this, he was already canvassing from our members, collecting on his own. So I had approached Prabhupada, that Srila Prabhupada, this person, we have to write something to our members to warn them about this person. So Prabhupada was a little hesitant to do that. Then finally, but he was not ready to give up on this devotee. But when this devotee finally started to live with that bogi yogi, I said, Prabhupada, now it's reached the limit. This person is on the beach, living with a bogus yogi, trying to learn how to pass the coin from one ear out the other. So I said that now, it's the end, it's finished. And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, you do not know about Lord Nityananda's mercy. I said, why, Srila Prabhupada? He said, because there is no end to Lord Nityananda's forgiveness. And later on, sure enough, that devotee came back. And again, Prabhupada tried to help him. He gave this person sannyas even. And the person eventually left. But I met him maybe a year ago, and he's still on some spiritual path of some type. But Prabhupada was so clear, looked at me, and he said, there's no limit to Lord Nityananda's mercy and compassion. So Srila Prabhupada is the manifest representative of Lord Nityananda Prabhu. And his forgiveness is like that. So I think that in terms of both our dealing with our own shortcomings and in terms of dealing with each other, we have to always remember that Prabhupada never rejected a devotee. There's very, very, very few instances in the history where Prabhupada, did so. It was very, 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 very rare.
But one of Srila Prabhupada's first disciples was in another place in India, perhaps Calcutta, and he had started to smoke ganja again. And so maybe the temple president from Calcutta phoned and gave the news to Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada said, tell him that if he does not give up this bad habit of smoking, I will reject him. After the phone call, one of the devotees asked Srila Prabhupada, is that true, that if he doesn't give up smoking ganja, you'll reject him? And Srila Prabhupada said, no. I cannot reject any disciple. I only said that to encourage him to stop smoking.
I came to the LA Temple in 1982, and as I think the first representative of the new devotees who were not fortunate enough to get Srila Prabhupada's association. I came in my first service was as a servant at ITV. I think Siddhanta may have recovered from that by now. And one of my responsibilities was to duplicate tapes for distribution. And one of the tapes that I duplicated many times was Your Ever Well-Wisher. And as such, I got to see Prabhupada and observe his nuances, hear the tenor of his voice. And at the time that I'd come to the temple, I had been exposed to many of his books. I'd read Bhagavad Gita a couple of times and pretty much had worked my way through Srimad Bhagavatam. I worked for ITV for 4 days a week, and on the weekends I went out on book distribution. And I recall at that time, somewhere around that time, we were distributing copies of Srila Prabhupada's biography. And I had read the first couple of sections of that. And I recall I was on Sankirtan, and I was explaining to someone the contents of this book. And I was saying to this person that someone someday is going to make a movie of this man's life. And I was telling him about how he came to America and so many of the pastimes. And I think that the combination of having seen Prabhupada so many times on film, having read his books, and having been exposed to his biography, was so meaningful to me. And I was explaining this to this person. So at some point, this person interrupted me and said, "So when did you meet him?" And it hit me like a hammer that I never had. And I forget, in all the years since, that I have never met Prabhupada. And to me, that is something which speaks of his purity and his potency. And I am so touched by hearing everyone's association with Srila Prabhupada that I just want to say that for those of us who have never met Srila Prabhupada, but still feel that connection, your words are truly nectar for us. Because through you, we can get those experiences. And I think that you should not take that lightly. I think that you've been very, very blessed. And for those of us who have not been so fortunate and who are eternally envious of you, that is a very great responsibility that I hope that you will continue to share with us and give us that mercy.
Krishna Kirtana Gana Natana Pano